So I want to talk about people that are wrongly convicted and prisoners that maintain their innocence. Some of you may be aware I've not really promoted it as to date that I've been appointed as a board member of the Association of Prisoners Maintaining Innocence. And it really does gut me when people don't understand that there actually are innocent people in prison. And sometimes people plead guilty even though they're innocent. And people probably don't understand why people would plead guilty for maintaining their innocence. There's also people that basically protest their entire sentence whilst maintaining innocence, and it really, in the current system, doesn't go in their favour. They're at a complete disadvantage because apparently they're not showing any remorse. The current system in the UK is, I don't know how to describe it. I wrote something down when I was on the train earlier today, and I just made up a story in my head. Um, but I truly believe I know there's a lot of people in prison that are wrongly convicted through, um, you know, basically them trying to get discounts on their sentence, um, or basically bad counsel, which happens a lot, more than anybody can ever imagine. And to try and prove it is very difficult. It's very difficult. The system is not correct. It's not set up to basically look at other opportunities for investigations and the like. The two parties bring their information forward and they basically go on that basis. Um, and if you got the more the money you got, the more likely of your prospects of success, which is not a fair system, in my opinion. The one thing I want to do as part of being a member of the board of APMI is basically give true exposure to this serious issue. And I hope to do that over the coming years. Because I think it's very important to people understand, especially jurors, to understand that the mere fact that someone's walking through into court, possibly on remand, in their scrubs, that perhaps they may not be guilty. The presumption of innocence, I believe, is not there. And that's wrong. And it's hard to change the mindset. It really is hard to change the mindset because one would have thought that before they come into court, all checks and balances have been done. So the defendants are on the back foot. And that's a problem for me. That's a problem for me because that's not fair. Because one thing history has taught, and there's plenty of evidence of this, is that the narrative is not always correct across the world. It's not just in the UK, across the world. I mean, there's so many corrupt countries out there as well, so that's hard to look at those sort of studies. I don't know ever even have studies, but in the UK, Western countries, they do have studies. And there's bodies set up largely from people that have experienced injustice, which is very, very interesting. So they've served their sentences and come out and say, I ain't going to give up. And you've got to commend these people. You really have. And that's the reason why I agreed to join APMI, because I think I've got enough energy to basically bring them to another level. And the because this needs to be spoken about more. We talk about how amazing our legal system is, and the world looks on us as if we're the gold standard. We are not the gold standard under any stretch of imagination. Under any stretch of imagination, we are really not. The system is underfunded, and basically, I believe it's like a conveyor belt. As low as Magistrates Court to Crown Court, I guess less so at the Supreme Court, but I don't know. I've never been involved in the Supreme Court, but I've witnessed Magistrates Court as being ridiculous. Crown Court as being, I don't know how to describe it other than theatre. And we look at the couple of injustice cases that we're going through on the radio station at the moment. I own Dreamcatcher Radio, where we're covering 2 stories. And it's blow your mind how this ever even started a court case, and how it meant it got to the CPS threshold, which apparently is a high threshold, with all the statements, unsigned witness statements, witnesses who were for the defense were not allowed to be, were not brought forward. And there's a constant argument that the state is paid for by the state, as in the prosecution, Regina. I think they've changed their name now to something else. And then the defense is, if you're on legal aid, also paid for by the state, and there's a conflict of interest there. I don't really buy that argument, to be honest, because I believe that defense want to win their cases. But what I've seen in many cases, the defense really, quite frankly, want you to do a deal, guilty or not, because their paycheck is very limited, especially on legal aid. And if you challenge them, you become adversarial, and they're no longer interested in your case. In my opinion, that's what I've experienced from people I've talked to, and what I've witnessed in court and conversations I've witnessed outside court. I used to spend many hours in magistrates' court whilst my wife was shopping. I wasn't interested in shopping, but I was interested in the court system. I never really knew about the court system, but I thought I would sit in the courts just to see what went on. I found Crown Court cases very slow and boring, so I never really spent much time there. But in the magistrates' court, the lower courts, I saw massive injustice. Nothing was really tested. It was a conveyor belt. It really is. So anyway, on the train home the other day, I wrote a short story. And it's completely made up, but it was food for thought. And I'm just going to talk about this story. The knock on the door came just after dawn. Daniel had been awakened already, replaying the previous day in his mind. The argument at work, the slammed door, the way his colleague stormed out. He never imagined that colleague would be found unconscious in the car park hours later, or that the police would decide he was the most convenient suspect. In the interview room, the fluorescent lights hummed like insects. 2 officers sat across from him, their notepads open, their expressions already set. Tell us again where you were between 7 and 9 p.m., the officers asked. He told them again and again, each time their eyebrows lifted a little higher, as if his words were performance they've already grown tired of. They had CCTV clips, blurry, grainy, impossible to interpret, but they insisted the figure looked like him. They had a witness who thought they saw him. They had a story and they needed someone to fit it. The narrative. I just added that bit actually. The solicitor, his Jew solicitor, arrived late, smelling of rain and cheap coffee. She listened, pen tapping against her pad, eyes flickering up only occasionally. I believe you, she said, but her voice lacked weight. But the evidence is not great for us. The word felt thin. She did her job, asked the right questions, challenged the officers when they pushed too hard, but Daniel could feel it. She didn't think he was innocent. She thought he was unlucky, maybe, or foolish, but not innocent. News travelled fast. His parents stopped calling as often, their voices tight with worry and unspoken doubt. Friends sent messages at first. Hang in there, mate. It will all sort itself out. But those dried up as the case dragged on. People don't like to stand too close to someone the world has decided is dangerous or guilty of a crime. He stopped checking his phone, stopped opening the curtains, stopped trying to explain. The courtroom felt like a theatre where everyone else had rehearsed except him. This is a very important point. The prosecution painted him as a jealous, volatile, capable of anything. His solicitor objected. Cross-examination presented his alibi, but her voice sounded small in the vast room. I want to make another comment on that. Is that basically what I've witnessed is that defense counsel seldom object. The reason being they're building their careers and they don't want to upset the judge, particularly in Crown Court, that is. Magistrates, I think less so. But if you're on the circuit, they also don't want to upset the magistrates as well. Because you get known to be an agitator and that could be inference and stuff like that. So, anyway, when a jury returned, they didn't look at him. That's how he knew guilty. The words echoed, bounced, set on his shoulder like a weight he could never lift. The point being is that injustice happens. And that's a short sequence of events that I've explained in my short writings. And I go back to my pretense is that if this happened to you or a family member, even if they're guilty, you want the justice system to kick in and basically understand and get full disclosure of what actually happened, not just follow a narrative that they're guilty. Now, imagine if they're not guilty. Just imagine if it happened to you, your brother, your sister, your auntie, your uncle, your aunt, your granddad, your grandmother, and alike. And basically, everybody just assumes that the system has done its job and that you're guilty and you're all alone in isolation. Just imagine that thought. Just imagine as well in basic minor domestic issues where, you have a minor argument and, Sheila speaks to her friend and says, "Oh, Steve's been all right arsehole tonight," and she explains why, because he wants to watch football instead of whatever it is, and then they talk about that for the next 20 minutes, and he could have watched 20 minutes of football in that time, but they make it into a massive issue, and just imagine by the time it got to court, he regularly abused her because he wasn't allowed to watch football. I'm just using that as an example. Injustice does happen. It does. There's so much research out there. And I just felt an opportunity. Well, I've got a little bit of time to talk about injustice. And we all know people that perhaps proclaim injustice. We don't know if it's true or not. But what we do know for a fact, there's people in prison that ought not to be in prison. For a fact. And that's what APMI is about.